a lot of people can be converted. You talk to them rationally and you sell the idea of liberty, because liberty really has to sell itself. A lot of people have forgotten what it's like not to have the government breathing down their neck, and Ron Paul is here to remind them. So we kind of came up with 6 rules that I found worked, and those 6 rules basically are: number 1 is don't make your issue their issue. The second one is don't get into debates. 3 is don't rat hole the discussion. Number 4 is don't be afraid to say I don't know. 5 is don't trash talk other candidates. And finally, number 6, which is most important, is when you've made the sale, stop selling. So I want to talk a little bit about some of these here. Rule number 1 is really don't make your issue their issue. Everyone in this room has their own hot button topic that is very important to you. And Ron Paul's campaign attracts a diverse number of people, each with their own view on what they want to see changed. The problem is your pet issue is not necessarily someone else's pet issue when you're talking to them. So what you need to do is ask what their biggest concern is with the country, and then talk to them about how Ron Paul can help address their issue. So there's 2 ways to approach it. I call it a correct way and an incorrect way. A correct way is when someone comes up to you, you basically say, I'm with the Ron Paul campaign. What do you think the biggest issue is facing the country today? And they may say something like, oh, it's immigration, or it's the Iraq war, or it's the economy, it's this or it's that. At that point, you can say, well, let me talk to you a bit about how Ron Paul feels about immigration or how he feels about the Iraq war. The incorrect way to do it is to ask them what their most important issue is, and when they tell you what it is, you can say, well, that's nice, I don't really care. Let me tell you about the Federal Reserve. And you jump on whatever your hot button issue is. That's the absolute worst thing to do because you're going to turn them off immediately. The second rule that we found is basically don't debate people, because it doesn't work. If someone doesn't like Ron Paul, just don't take it personal. The longer you're there arguing with them in the booth, the less time you have to talk to someone who wants to hear what you have to say. Okay? And we ran into this a couple times at the fair. One particular case I remember was a lady came in. She was very pro-abortion rights. And she came in, and you could tell she was on fire. And she wanted to start digging into us about Ron Paul's position on abortion rights, and he's pro-life, taking away the rights. There was no use in us sitting there discussing the nuances of Ron Paul's position on states' rights versus federal rights. She was just getting angry, and she was scaring people off in the booth. So at that point, we just stopped in and say, hey, we don't debate. Thanks for listening. Have a good day. Just send them on their way. There's no use keeping someone there in the booth who doesn't want to talk to you. The third rule is what we call don't rat hole into discussion. You're going to have about 30 seconds with each person to kind of grab their attention. If you start jumping down into an issue and start elaborating again on what you feel is most important to yourself, what you're going to find is, and I don't mean to be blunt, but they're probably really not going to care. And what you've done is you've wasted the opportunity to grab them and bring them into an issue that they maybe do care about. Now, what I find is that our number 1 goal is to have people leave with a positive impression of Ron Paul, maybe with some literature in their hand, or maybe just with the idea that, hey, when I get home, I'm going to go on the internet and look this guy up. That's really what we want to do. But when you go into this rat hole discussion of a various topic, you don't really get to do that point. And there are 2 things that I saw that really developed in the rat holes. And the first one was political philosophy. And actually, this didn't happen with anyone in our group. This happened when a guy came up to me and began lecturing us on libertarianism, right? And he just started going into these little nuances and stuff like that. And my eyes kind of glazed over, and he must have gone on for 40 minutes. I'm thinking, oh man, I can't get rid of this guy. Finally, he shut up and left. But the point is, I was thinking to myself, this is what we don't want to do, because that guy didn't make his point to me at all. He got in these various philosophical arguments that really broke things down. The second thing that really tends to blow up in your face is talking about conspiracy theory stuff. And each person has their own deal that we all have a problem with. But kind of what I like to say is, if you have to lower your voice to talk about it, it's a conspiracy theory. Okay? So best just to, again, we're here to talk people, to get them to think about Ron Paul and to go home and look him up. And we can only hurt ourselves when we go off on different tangents, because you never know what a person's gonna feel, right? They really need to go home and make their own decision, reach their own conclusions, because that way when they feel like they've reached their own decision on something, it hasn't been pushed in their head, that's how you get a strong supporter. The fourth rule is basically knowing when to say, I don't know. Sometimes people come up and ask you a question, and you're far better off saying you don't know the answer to it than going ahead and trying to come up with something or stating a position incorrectly or stating a position that's simply flat out wrong. Maybe isn't something Ron Paul believes at all, because that can only hurt you. And usually when people are asking you a yes or no type question, there's a deeper issue involved. And how this worked out for me, I had one guy come up to me at the fair. He was obviously very pro-union. He had a union hat on, a union shirt on, and he's a big, bulky guy. You could tell he's construction or some heavy trade. I didn't want to anger him. And he said, what's Ron Paul's position on unions? And frankly, I didn't know. But I said, well, I don't really know his position on unions. You know, what is it about that issue that's important to you? And that's the important thing, right? I brought it back to what's important to him. He said, well, he's concerned about the number of jobs and stuff moving overseas. And at that point, I had an answer. I said, well, Ron Paul's against NAFTA. He's against the World Trade Organization. He's against managed trade. I converted him right there. Instead of coming up with something like, oh, he's for unions or he's against unions, something that I would totally have to pull out of thin air, I took the issue back to why he was asking that question, why it was important to him, and then giving him an answer that I knew with certainty was Ron Paul's position. Rule number 5 is don't trash talk other candidates. It's not that it's not fun to do, okay? But the problem is that people don't like being told, in effect, that a person they like is a jerk, fascist, sellout, corporate lackey, socialist pig, right? No one likes to be told that. And each minute you spend bashing another candidate is 1 minute that you're not talking about Ron Paul, okay? So it's very important to stay on message there. So if someone says to you that they're a supporter of, whatever, Obama, Clinton, Edwards, McCain, Giuliani, what you could say is, oh, that's interesting. What is about that candidate you like? And at that point, you say, well, okay, have you considered Ron Paul's position over here, which is maybe very similar to them, or maybe a little different perspective that you hadn't considered? The wrong way to do it is when they say that they like Giuliani, Obama, Clinton, whatever, is to basically say, man, only an idiot would support that candidate. Because what you basically have called them is an idiot. And that's really not how we're here to win friends and supporters. So again, don't waste time talking about other candidates. If they bring it up, try to bring it back to Ron Paul. If they start bashing a candidate, yeah, maybe you can go along with it for a little bit if you agree with them. But don't go out of your way to go bashing candidates. It tends to be not a productive use of time, and it's always better to present a positive message so people leave thinking positive things about Dr. Paul.